From the Samuel Institute headquarters in Alexandria, Virginia, this is On Human Flourishing. I'm Dr. Wayne Jonas. Philosopher, theologian, and healer Bob Duggan has practiced traditional acupuncture for more than 4 decades. In 1981, he co-founded the Traditional Acupuncture Institute in Laurel, Maryland. Since then, the school has evolved and expanded to include postgraduate studies in nutrition, yoga therapy, health and wellness coaching, leadership, herbal medicine, and acupuncture and oriental medicine. Today, the school is an accredited graduate university and has taken on a new name, the Maryland University of Integrative Health. Duggan holds a master's degree in human relations and community studies from New York University and a master's in moral theology from St. Joseph's Seminary in Yonkers. In 2012, he published a groundbreaking book, Breaking the Iron Triangle, outlining how transforming our healthcare system to shift away from disease treatment and towards health creation could save our economy more than $1.2 trillion. Bob, it is absolutely wonderful to have you here and be able to share in this dialogue and to talk about what I know is one of your favorite topics and one of my favorite topics, and that's healing. You and I have known each other for a while, but you've been in this business much longer than I have. And so what I'm hoping is that we can tap in just a little bit of your wisdom around healing to let our listeners hear about that. But before we get into that, I want to find out a little bit about you and also have our listeners hear about how did somebody who was basically a theologian and a human relations expert, at least that's how you started off in life, how did you get into the area of healing healthcare and alternative healthcare, non-mainstream healthcare? How did that happen?
First, I want to thank you because while I was exploring healing, I heard about you having something to do with homeopathy, but you also had the prestigious position of being head of research at Walter Reed. And I thought, well, maybe I can con this guy into talking to me about some real stuff. And so thank you for that partnership, because that goes back 20 years. So thank you for it.
Thank you.
Yes, I come out of a background of priesthood, of theology, of community wellness, of holistic healing, humanistic psychology. And I was actually, in 1970, went to Asia to meet anybody who knew anything about those worlds. So this was before Nixon went to China, couldn't get into China. And it's a long, wonderful story. But on my way back from Asia, I was heading, I'd spent almost a year there. And I was heading for England, and my hands and feet had become arthritic. I could barely hold the wheel of a car. And I was 30 years old. This made no sense to me. And when I got to England, I said to this man I was working with, I was going to do some teaching, I said, I need a medical checkup. How do I go to the National Health Service? And he said, well, you could go to the National Health Service, but we've just met this acupuncturist. Why don't you go see him? And the first thing was I was shocked because no one in Asia at that point would talk to me about acupuncture. I'd seen the signs, I heard of it, but any educated person would say that's grandmother's nonsense. And I couldn't find out anything. And then I get to England and I find out it's been in Europe for 300 or 400 years. So I went to see this man named Worsley, and he examined me and spent a bit of time. And he said, boy, your body was very smart. It protected you from a heart attack. Your hands and feet were protecting you. And with my philosophical, theologic background, I remember walking out of his office after that first visit and thinking, if he's right, all of Western thought is wrong. If my body is wise enough to protect my heart by creating some pain in my hands and feet and slowing me down, that's extraordinary, because my body's just something I carry around like a machine. And I didn't know much about it. I didn't think much about it. But after 3 or 4 weeks, I had no more pain. I go, wow, this is really good. This is interesting. And he was talking about it as nature. Nature knows how to heal. So I stayed in England to study with him. And then about a year later, I'm reading one of the Times of London or one of the papers, and I see this report on a drug called enteroviroform. and lots of people dying of side effects of cardiac problems and loss of peripheral circulation. And that was a drug I'd been given over the counter in Hong Kong for dysentery. And I thought, oh my Lord, he was onto something. He'd never heard of intraviaform. And he said, whatever this is, it's protecting your heart. And then I found I really had not something wrong with me, but a side effect of a drug. So I've been on this quest to understand, and really in that moment understood. I honestly wasn't that interested in acupuncture. I was interested in, this upsets the philosophical thinking of the West. And so from there on, it was just, acupuncture became a vehicle for rethinking what is physiology.
So he basically pointed out that your body was telling you something, and that by attending to your body, you could improve your health, or you could or even prevent something more serious by attending to that.
And I haven't learned much since, because what I teach right now is, like, if I were meeting you for the first time and you were coming to me for help, I'd say, Wayne, you have 5 symptoms, and they come and they go. I don't know if you know them, but most people come in and say, I have this disease. And I say, all right, have this, but I bet there are lots of symptoms that come and go. And most people at first say no, and I say, well, then you're probably going to be a lot more ill by the time you leave my office today. Had this with a very wealthy businessman recently who I knew was very skeptical and just wanted to find out what his wife and kids were doing. He said, no, I don't have any problems. So we kept talking and discovered he had shoulder pain that comes and go. And he said, but that's just bursitis. My doctor told me it's bursitis. And I said, oh. And I found out he had some low back pain. Oh, that's just from the way riding on airplanes. And so I said, well, if it's bursitis, how does it come and go? Or how do you come and go it? And he looked at me like I was crazy. I said, well, if it's bursitis, it's there or it's not. But somehow one morning it's there, the next morning it's not. So you have a switch somewhere. And he was totally befuddled. I could see it. I'm not using alternative integrative medicine to fix anybody. I'm using it because I think it enhances sensory perception in the immune system so that people pick up on how their body is very wise.
So being aware of your body as a whole person is part of the basic philosophy that things are connected. They're connected in some way. After you came back from England, you decided you wanted to explore this, and you did more than explore it. You actually created a whole school for teaching it. So can you kind of tell us a little bit about sort of how that happened and the development of, I guess, the Thai Sophia Institute and this type of thing? Why did you do this?
To stay out of jail, basically, because when I got back from England, I wanted to raise my children here. It was too damp cold in Oxford, England to stay there, okay? So it was really get in trouble with the dampness or move back. Maryland was the only state that had a law that allowed us to practice in 1975 that was stable. And what the FDA was saying, the needles were experimental, the laws were unstable, doctors had control over it. So we had to create something stable, and people wanted to learn. It was brand new. So I never really wanted to start a school, but I did want to have a respectable future and stay out of jail.
Right, I see.
So
okay.
it was very pragmatic.
Created a place where you could practice.
Where I could practice.
And transmit this concept.
And honestly, Wayne, in 1975, 76, when we opened the place in downtown Columbia, Maryland, I thought I was starting a museum. Really honestly spoke about it as a museum of an ancient way of healing. Never thought it would grow very big, thought it would stay quite odd and small. It was a very unusual thing to be doing. Whatever about the West Coast, where there were some number of practitioners, doing this on the East Coast was almost unheard of.
Unheard of, yeah.
And yet, as people came in out of curiosity, we were just lucky that some business people who were developing this new town of Columbia were basically very curious people and started to show up and started to tell their friends. And so it went from there, and it some way ran itself. in just growing.
Well, it became a school for teaching healing. I know that they taught acupuncture, and then herbs were brought in. But as I recall, there was a basic course that wasn't about any of those things per se, and you didn't come out with a skill in that or a new modality. You learned about the philosophy of healing.
We actually
about that
started doing acupuncture in 1975, and we didn't allow, because herbs were around, homeopathy was around, all of these things were around, we did not allow any of those conversations at the Institute until the late 90s, and for a very specific reason, because we had used them in England. The language of herbs was, this herb fixes that. Even the language of homeopathy in its simplistic forms was, this fixes that. When you come in with a headache and I put a needle in your toe and something happens in your head, your entire orientation to your body changes. So we declined to have any other conversation for about 15 years, even though we knew they were valuable conversations. And we realized that we were delivering an applied philosophy. And then we had an extraordinary man who was chief operating officer of the Rouse Company, Woody Bevel. And Woody said to us, after he'd come for treatment and joined our community, he said, I want this for my business. The way you're talking about things, it doesn't just apply to acupuncture, it doesn't just apply to the body, this applies to life. So by the early 80s, we started what we call a School of Philosophy and Healing in Action, SOPHIA. And we were backtracking then into saying, oh, it's all about oneness. And we haven't mentioned it, but I think it's very relevant to this conversation. My mentor from the time I was age 12, I met Ivan Illich. And Ivan Illich is the great scholar of the last century, social critic, wrote Medical Nemesis. And Illich had taught me to question everything. He taught me to question everything in terms of its historical background and significance. And Illich, I was in England studying acupuncture in 73, 74. And I had been very close to Illich. I was like his family. I knew his mother, his brothers, spent a lot of time with him. And I went to see him. He was writing or editing parts of Medical Nemesis at Oxford in 73, 74. And I went to see him one day. And he asked me what I was doing. I told him what I was doing. I was studying acupuncture and practicing. And all of a sudden, he just cut me off, wouldn't talk to me. Absolutely just wouldn't talk to me. And it was very painful because we've been very close. He was like family. And I couldn't figure it out, but also I was caught in this business of trying to survive with acupuncture, figure out what that was, make connections to learn how to do it. So it wasn't until the early 80s I really decided to follow up with Ivan. And he had published by then Medical Nemesis. So I went to Mexico where he lived. He lived in Cuernavaca part of the year, and he lived in Hanover, Germany part of the year, and was writing his books and scholarship. And I just showed up in Cuernavaca and called him up on the phone and said, can I stop by just to say hello? In his brusque manner, come by tomorrow at 12:30, we'll have lunch. We got to there, and he wouldn't let me in the door. He took me out to lunch down to the street cafe at the end of the block. And we talked for an hour. Then he went home, and we left to go where we were going. I thought this is very odd, and I felt very sad. Because I'd known him from 12, when I was 12, and his family, everything. A few weeks later, I get a call from him. Will you meet me at Dulles Airport? Drive me up to State College. So I went and met him at the airport, and I drove him up to State College, which is about a 3-hour drive. And I remember it was dark, it was snowy, it was November, and you go up mountains, and all the way up, the man is pestering me. What do you do? What do you do? What do you say? How do you think about this? And it was, how much do you charge? How often do you see people? And we just went the whole way like that. I never really grasped what he was doing. So we got up to State College. He wanted me to treat him, and then he wanted to do his yoga. And then he said, we'll go down, we'll have dinner. So we sat in the lobby, in around the fireplace in the Nittany Lodge in State College, and he said to me, "Where did you get this?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "I know all the history. Nobody has talked like this in 500 years. What you're saying was known in all the textbooks 500 years ago, and then it disappears. Where did you get it? This is what was medicine in the medieval cities, the way you're describing healing. And that's what I wrote about in my book." And then he went on and said, "I cut you off because I thought you were going to bastardize this ancient tradition and turn it into modern Western medicine." And what he was really pointing out was that I had an oral tradition. It was in none of the written traditions. And if you go and you read his book, Medical Nemesis, the core of it is that the Western thought of death is erroneous. If you're fighting death, he details the history of it in there. A culture that sees death as an enemy will start to spend itself out of existence trying to prevent death. We've created this illusion that a human could live without suffering, that any illness has a pill and you could fix it. And he said it is the most destructive and most cherished of our modern certitudes, that we could be healthy and we could avoid death. So that's the philosophic underpinning.
So when I read Medical Nemesis originally, I had just started medical school, and he was saying the philosophy around medicine taking over or co-opting health is what's going to kill us basically, or destroy our economy and this type of thing. It was extremely radical. I now run a group called the Creating Wellbeing Leadership Group, which is a number of federal leaders, and they're talking about how do we get from healthcare to health. They're basically saying we need less medicine, we need more health creation. I just saw a book just came out called Less Medicine, More Health, and he was very prophetic about this.
So if you think about the word health, it's an abstraction. And once we're all dealing now in abstractions. And so we have stress as an abstraction, health as an abstraction, systems, they're all abstractions. And so I'll give you an example. On Saturday, Susan, my wife, did a workshop for about 100 caregivers, mainly, but maybe half of them health social workers, as nurses, aides, and things. The other half family members tending for elderly folks with Alzheimer's. One of them got up and talked about overwhelm and how she was so agitated by the overwhelm of taking care of people. And then somebody else said, "But you can't say no, you just got," and you could sense the overwhelm in their bodies. So I stopped the conversation and I said, "Where do you feel the overwhelm in your body?" Well, she never thought about that. And after I pushed her a little bit, she said, "Well, it's all here."
She pointed to her heart.
And so I said, "First, let's take a breath. Can you take a breath?" Because she knew there was pain. And you could sense this tightness. I said, "Is that what happens when you got an overwhelm and with the person you're taking care of?" And I got her to name the person. And she did. And I said, "Does anybody acknowledge you for what you do?" And she sort of mumbled around. I said, "Anybody really acknowledge you?" And I asked the whole room, how many people in this room get enough acknowledgement for what they do? And no hands go up. Never the hands go up. So I said, "Would you allow everybody in the room to acknowledge you for taking care of this person?" Had her name the person, first name. And so everybody stood up and cheered for her. And as soon as they all sat down, I said, "How's your pain right now?" "No pain." Once I do that, they go, "Oh, how did I do that? How did I create pain and how did I turn the pain off?" And I don't believe anymore that medicine, integrated medicine, acupuncture, anything else, is effective when people are not in touch with the most basic sense of their own body. They're dealing in abstractions. And so you have to get to, you notice while you're telling me that your shoulders are up around your ears. And now talk to me when you drop them. And you get a different voice. So the modern person, Illich put it later on, common sense has gotten lost. And so I don't know if any of this can work if we don't recover our body, because my sense of acupuncture for sure in all these years, I've been practicing 40 years now, 45 years, is it awakens an awareness of the body. But then what do you do with it when it's awake?
I want to get a little bit at this because I wanted to talk about and try to give some examples to our listeners about how do you go about this process of awakening to your body, and are there tools and techniques for sort of facilitating one's recovery, healing processes that aren't connected necessarily to the modality, the needle or the knife or the pill or the herb? What is that process? How does that work? Can you describe that in a way for the listeners to sort of understand?
So I'm 75. I'm not on any pills or medications. I have no diagnosed disease. And I've been doing this work for 40, 45 years. At this point, the past 2-3 years, I've given up on all the healthcare systems. I've given up on all the modality systems. And what I've realized, you saw it in the book you wrote, The Lovely Introduction for Common Sense. Going through that, I distilled 12 practices, 12 skills, but they're practices, not ideas. The first one of those, Wayne, is upset is optional. So when I'm sitting with somebody, it happened recently. This is a man, I won't go into all the details. He was in very severe pain for 3 years. Okay, and I'm talking to him about it and getting it, and I said something about his family. He erupted in anger. Okay, so as I went on talking, I said, what happened in your body when you just got that? And he told me, he said, it's hurting, it's like really painful, it's worse. Put the pain on a scale of 10 to about 1. The short version of this is, I said to him, you've been dealing with this issue in your family for 60 years. Could you just be peaceful with it? It is how it is. It isn't going to change. You could, but it isn't going to change. And so I walked him into letting go of it for a few minutes. Could you let go of it for a few minutes? And he did. In 4 weeks, 80% of his pain is gone. And the tragedy is, I bet the system had spent a couple of $100,000 on this man and never even asked about this issue in his life. Never even asked about it. Wouldn't know what to do with it if they did. They'd sent him to psychologists. But so when I'm with somebody, I'm starting off giving them choices. And I'll start off telling them about Charlie and his asthma and how the wheezing taught him. And then I'll say, what have you been upset about today? And invariably, everybody's had an upset. And so what happened in your body when you got upset? And then I say to them, when you had a flat tire, did getting upset fix the tire? And their mind gets as disoriented from these questions as when I put a needle in your toe and your headache gets better.
So you see the needle and the questions is doing similar things.
Same thing. And in fact, I will say to students, you may not put a needle in until you've already created the opening with word.
I see.
You've got to be devil the normal thinking.
So it sounds like part of what you're trying to do is you're trying to help people connect their body to the other aspects of their person, to their inner part, to their psychology, their social part.
What other part?
The upset.
There is no other part.
No.
We have this illusion that there's the body and the mind and the spirit. That's crazy. There's more dense, my bones, to less dense, my breath. But we're operating with this separation of these three things. And once I say that, people, it's not like there are separate parts to it. When you get upset, it goes right to your body. Because literally, this is so primitive what I'm doing. It's so basic. It's never thought about. It's never even thought about that a person, I wrote one of the essays in Common Sense was one day treating 4 people in a row, all of whom were very highly educated. And I'd ask them about their symptoms, and none of them could describe them. They could tell me what the doctor said. They had an abstracted body. They had no observer of their own body. And when I begin then, if that day I almost gave up. I thought, I can do a lot of stuff, but teach the whole society to recover their sense that they have a body? I mean, think, Wayne, right now. This has gotten worse in the past 5-6 years. Most of my patients no longer know when they're tired. And when I say to them, what time are you tired? And they tell me. And I say, do you go to bed when you're tired? No. It's almost like there's something wrong if you went to bed when your body was tired. So most people don't know when they're tired. They don't know when they're thirsty. They have never thought about how to breathe. They don't notice their body tightening when they get upset. Now, these are not ideas. What has to happen is they have to practice them day in and day out. And I set up ways for them to have reminders. So just while I was sitting in your office, I sent a note to one woman who's just been through some horrific medical stuff. Unnecessary if it had been caught in time. Totally unnecessary. Comes from her living like this. And so she began to realize when she relaxes and goes still. So she asked me, send me the word still at noon every day for a while. And I do. And I have other people doing that for other people. Because it's what we said about yoga. So many people do yoga as a morning practice, but then don't live yoga all day. That's useless. The woman yesterday who said, I can't say no. People ask me things, and I can't say no. I said, well, if you can't say no, you can't say yes. You're just on automatic. So you actually never respond to anybody. And I've watched this with families. How to get the dishes done is very complex. It'd be nice if somebody did the dishes in this house, but no direct request. Wayne, would you have the dishes done by 5 o'clock and put away? The art form, which is used in business, so my commitment now is to, I called it at the end of Breaking the Iron Triangle, a commitment to develop, I call it the 100 Families Project. But it's to recover the ability to have conversations around the dinner table where people learn to not be an upset, they learn how their symptoms work, they actually recover their body. And my betting from my grandchildren is that as families begin to do that, visits to any form of health professional will drop by 80%. Because most of it, and I'm finding among the hardest people to learn this are health professionals. I've taught these skills to a retired Special Forces man, and he's working with Special Forces stuff at NSA. And he's taken 3 or 4 of these skills, taught it to the work group, and he's getting commendations from higher up saying, what are you guys doing? But it's so simple. Special Forces people know you get upset, you're likely to be dead. But he's teaching this team upset is optional, teaching them how to acknowledge each other, teaching them how to get a real completion of conditions of satisfaction in a request. The ease around that's translating to home. Somebody else has taken that to Pepsi, somebody else has taken it to big corporations. But my main goal is watching it happen around the family table. And I believe if we can raise the next generation of kids knowing how to take care of their own bodies and paying attention. I have 8 grandchildren, and they have rarely, if ever, seen a doctor. They're up to age 14. One of them was in school recently, and the teacher came over, he's eating lunch, and he had a bottle with him with a drink. And the teacher said, oh, tomorrow, what are you drinking? And he said, oh, that's my medicine. Well, everybody freaked out and took him to the nurse's station. You can't have medicine in school. You know, the drill. And he's in shock. What do you mean? And so they get him into the principal's office, and there's a whole hoo-ha. He's dragged off like a criminal. And they said, what medicine do you have? And he said, bilberry juice. That's not a medicine. He said, yes, it is. When I get congestion, I drink bilberry juice. That's my medicine. I'm thinking, that's another world.
Yeah, that's another world.
He knows a symptom tells him how to eat. Imagine a growing up world, or the whole stuff about stretching and breathing as an antidote or an alternative to Ritalin. It's well documented. Imagine if all kids went to school knowing how to breathe and stretch.
Tell me a little bit about the book you just wrote, Breaking the Iron Triangle. Why did you write the book? What is it about? What is your hope with that book?
Let me start out with the end result of the book. I don't think this is directly from my book. Mark Bertolini, who's the CEO of Aetna, just gave everybody at Aetna a huge raise. The lower paid workers all got 33% raises. He then instituted yoga classes. He instituted all sorts of wellness programs, 35,000 employees at Aetna. He himself, his son had been diagnosed with cancer, and they told him when his son was 16, his son was dying. He quit work at that point, went and took care of his son, taught him yoga, taught him Reiki, all sorts of things. Son is fine. A couple of years later, Bertolini himself. This is all from a Davos interview at the Global Forum a couple of months ago, is where I learned it. He put in $25 million into this, to give the raises, to put in the yoga, to put in the wellness classes. And he does yoga himself, and he said, it's the most powerful thing. He said, I'm not very good, I'm only at stage 2. And he went into the most glorious description of yoga that I've ever heard. The return in the first year on the $25 million investment is $100 million. They saved $3,000 per employee and gained 69 minutes per month productivity gain. So they got their money back. That was the point of the book, to say 1.2 trillion of our current healthcare economy, everybody acknowledges is waste. This is something you've done, and the dollars are there, right? So the book was written to say, we have 4 false premises for our entire healthcare system. Fighting death, fighting disease, some expert will fix me, my body's dumb. And then track that history to watch the evening news. If you have a symptom, if you watch the evening news and you don't have a symptom, you'll have one by the time it's over. But if you watch it for 4 hours straight, there are at least 20 diseases, some of which are attractive. You know, I really like the purple pill. I don't know what it does, but those people are attractive. So it's inundated with this somebody will automatically fix anything. And that's crazy. And then I look at whether it's homeopathy or acupuncture or surgeons or anybody else, I can't fix people. It's really crazy to give away the empowerment to somebody else. People say to me, who's the primary care provider? What do you mean? The patient is. The person themselves is the primary care provider. All this turf battling is crazy. So the book is essentially that, tracking it through, and the last chapter is essentially a call to large corporations to do what Bertolini is doing and what other people that you know are doing. And they're reaping a lot of money out of it. So it's a no-brainer.
So aligning this type of an approach with the economics you think is a win-win.
Absolutely. You have to be dumb not to. You put in $25 million, you get out $100 million. I think Boeing just stopped using insurance companies. I just spoke to a national convention of Blue Cross Blue Shield executives in Tampa, and I did this with them. I started out by saying, who here has been upset this morning? Asked them then to experience their body with the upset. Then I had them tell me how the upset had benefited them. And a number of people stood up in the audience. I was surprised because a couple of years ago, executives would have been too intimidated to do that in front of each other. There was zero resistance in this large group, every one of them. And when they talked to me privately, they'd all given up on the system. I mean, it was, you do this work. Yeah, that's the work I do. But I don't want my family doing this.
Is Obamacare going to move us in this direction?
The quality control stuff is beginning to. Like the hospital up in Cumberland was just picked up by Business Insider because they've incentivized the community to move people out of the hospital, and they are actually making money doing it. Most of the hospitals are resisting that. Now, Maryland has a unique situation in that Obamacare comes to Maryland, which has always had a cap on hospital costs. So now all the hospitals in Maryland are caught because their finances have got to shift to quality care, keeping people out of the hospital. And I don't think Obamacare is just shifting the way the money goes. Obamacare is just giving 20 million more people access to a very bad system. If we're very honest about it, it's just allowing 20 million more people to get bad medicine. But at least they get something. they're not left at home getting worse until they die or need a heart transplant. So in that sense, it's good. But you and other people ferreted quality control issues in there and the end of piecemeal charging. There are a number of factors built into it, which were not the basic concept, but they got in, and I think we're already seeing it's forcing costs down. It's forcing doctors to make a choice. And then there's there's something happening. My doctor, I figured at 75 I should have one, in case something happens and I got trapped in a hospital, I would somebody who knows how to get me back out. And so this guy, Andy Lazarus, who takes everybody he can off drugs, and he's just a marvelous man. But Andy will say, he gave a talk up at Wisdom Well a couple of months ago, and he says, I sit with people who want me to run a full physical on them. And I show them the data, and I say, if I run all those tests, you're going to have a lot of false positives, and then you're going to have more tests, and you're going to have more false positives. So I can almost guarantee you, if I do the physical you want to have, you're going to be worse. And he said, most people still choose it. But if he doesn't offer it, he gets penalized. So what's gone beyond what Illich did about the concept health is we now have a system so built on feedback loops that all human interaction is washed out of it if you're in. And so this man has written a book, Curing Medicare, pointing to the perverse incentives for him to practice bad medicine.
Do you think that we can shift those incentives to one that is more along the model of the self-care component that you've just described?
I haven't figured out. The only people with that power on a large scale are the CEOs like Bertolini, who are willing to say, I'm not playing that game anymore. And out of their personal, because for him, he had an accident, he was almost paralyzed, told he'd never walk again, and he walks perfectly because he used all sorts of natural things. And it's like, so what I've opted in, that's a major piece of work, how to get the incentives, like the military. You work a lot with the military. The military has an enormous incentive to do this. I just saw the other day, finally somebody said, oh, yoga is helpful for PTSD. And I thought, I bet Wayne is somewhere in the middle of that. And I have a whole bunch of former special forces that are studying with me now. And they go, well, that's pretty obvious. Breathing does help if you're going to fire a gun.
Right. Well, as you know, we have an initiative here that we call the Wellness Initiative for the Nation, or WIN. Right. And its goal really is to see if we can, on a national level, get our investment to go from medical treatment or medical care more over into health and the creation of health. And I think what you've described to us today is really, in many ways, the fundamental behavioral process that allows people to tap into their own inherent healing capacity, and that's really an untapped treasure chest for the future.
It's where all the resources are, and it's the piece that I think, I don't know if you're doing it, it's the question, a persistent question. What did you notice in your body when you did that? What did you notice in your body when you said that? How did you change your body? And the way I say it is, did you notice that you drugged your body? And then you drugged it with some pleasure, but your words are drugs. It's one of the skills. When you say a word, your body either feels terrific or feels miserable. And it's that mindfulness. And when you're mindful, you're happy.
In many ways, you've drilled down to sort of the fundamental behavioral component about how healing happens, which is exactly what I was trying to get at.
It's so simple, people can't believe it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for
You're
all
welcome.
you do, all you've done for so many years,
Thank you.
and your continued leadership in this area.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
In a fast-paced society, being overwhelmed and stressed are often accepted as normal parts of life. But in doing so, we lose the cues that are the signals about our health. As Bob describes, acupuncture and other healing modalities become the tools to help people gain responsibility for personal health, empowering them to be more connected in mind, body, and spirit. The application of integrative medicine can only be effective when individuals are aware and engaged in their own health creation, aware of themselves emotionally and behaviorally, and aware of what's happening in their body as it relates to the physical and mental events of the world around them. As Bob writes in 100 Families Say, upset is optional. My body is wise. My headaches, backaches, wheezing, and other events can be the guides to wise living.